here we go. First time ever supersized throwdown. 3 classic 70s Kiss records. Rock and Roll Over versus Destroyer versus Love Gun. You can pick only one. What's it going to be? We begin in Calgary, Canada. Frankie is up first. What do you got, Frank?
Eddie, thanks to you and Joel for a super entertaining 2022, and Happy New Year to you both.
Thank you. You as well.
First off, just quick, I got an idea for you for your 40-year celebration. I'm wondering if going forward throughout this year, if you wanted to make every throwdown or top list, everything would have to be from 1983. Albums, top singers, guitarists, whatever.
Not a crazy idea. We could think about that.
Kind of a fun thing to come in and out of throughout the year.
Yeah, for sure. I'll think about it, Frank. Thanks. Well, this already knocks it out because this is from the 70s, so
well,
that's not going to work. But
going forward,
right. All right. What's your pick on this, Frank?
Okay. Well, I like the production of all 3 albums, but I for some reason I tend to favor the Eddie Kramer albums, so that leaves 2 left, and I'm going with Love Gun. I like the cover art. I like the debut of Ace on Shock Me, and then I don't know, the cherry on top with it being Peter's last album. I don't really like the cover, but it's not really that big of a deal breaker. I wish they'd just kept the lyrics the same just to be a little more outrageous. I think that would have been kind of fun. So, yeah, that's my pick.
Well, interesting comment there, Frankie. Thank you. You say Peter's last record. Obviously, it's not Peter's last record. Peter's on Kiss Alive 2, and Peter is on Dynasty playing drums on one track and doing a vocal on it. But you are right in that Love Gun is the last Kiss record to really be the original 4 guys before the cracks started showing. Because shortly after this, the wheels did start to come off in terms of the lineup, the interband dynamics. Of course, they made 2 studio records after this, credited to the original lineup, but any Kiss fan knows they weren't the original lineup. Anton Fig played the bulk of the drums on Dynasty and all of the drums on Unmasked. Peter, even though he was pictured on that record, didn't do anything on it at all. So kind of last record, but Peter was on Dynasty and, of course, pictured on Unmasked. When you talk about the album covers, if you want to factor that into your decision-making, the Ken Kelly and the late Ken Kelly, who passed away recently, did Destroyer and did do Love Gun. Rock and Roll Over, he did not do. And those are all 3, I think, incredible album covers. And as far as production is concerned, Destroyer is Ezrin, Rock and Roll Over, Eddie Kramer, Love Gun credited to Kiss and Eddie Kramer, meaning the band themselves had input in the production on that. So for the most part, Eddie did the last 2, Ezrin doing the first one. And it was always really interesting to me that Ezrin, although he took the band in such a huge growth direction and created what most consider in Destroyer to be the classic Kiss record, he didn't work with the band again until The Elder, which was a disaster. And then later after that, Revenge, which is considered to be a good non-original Kiss record. But I always thought that was a pretty interesting thing too. Okay, so you can put Frankie down for Love Gun as his pick. Here's Christian in Burbank, California. Hey, Christian, what do you got?
Hey, Eddie. For me, it was actually pretty easy to throw out Love Gun, mostly because you talked about And Then She Kissed Me. It's just never been like, it would have been like a great B-side, like, wow, they covered that song. But on the album, that and Tomorrow and Tonight are why I threw it out. But I had to really think about it because obviously there's great songs on all 3 of them, obviously. But I think Destroyer wins just because it's not a concept record, obviously, but it has like a feel all the way throughout. And I guess like as a kid, that word for me was epic. It just, and I love the songs on Rock and Roll Over, but it has to be Destroyer, mostly because when I first got into Kiss in the late 80s, I didn't even know about Rock and Roll Over. You couldn't look it up on the internet. And I was like, well, this is their album from 1976. And now I have their album from 1977. So for months, I had no idea about any of those songs. So I found it a little bit later. Still love it, but I feel like it has to be Destroyer.
Yeah, Destroyer. Thank you, Christian. Destroyer been described as, although it's not a concept record, I've heard it described as cinematic in just the sound of it. And, Destroyer, they just did that 45th anniversary box set of it, and they did do a surround sound remix of it, which I've not had a chance to listen to all of that yet. I do have the equipment to do it, but I just have not had a chance to do it. But I did listen to a little bit of it, and it lends itself to that pretty well because Ezra injected so many different things in there, sound effects and the choir and the organ sounds and all these things that they did, which were just nothing that anybody saw coming from Kiss. Which is why, as much as the songs are great on Destroyer, I lean to Rock and Roll Over because Rock and Roll Over was Kiss getting back to being like a raw hard rock band. It's as raw and live, amps plugged in, drums, no keyboards, no orchestras, no nothing. Not to say any of that was bad on Destroyer, but Rock and Roll Over was them getting back to being that super raw meat and potatoes, hard rock band. So I think if my calculation is correct, we got a vote for each record at this point. This is Turner in Ottawa, Canada. Hi, Turner.
Hey, Eddie. How you doing, man?
Great. What do you got?
Well, first time, long time. It's a great topic. You really make it hard when you do your intros for these things, running through everything. But I got to go with Love Gun.
Any thoughts, any reason, any logic?
Yeah, well, I mean, once again, the album cover there, you look at that and you see these guys, like, these guys might be the coolest guys on the planet if they weren't already. But, you got Paul shining on I Stole Your Love and Love Gun, and Gene with, Christine 16, which you said was a little bit of an interesting topic, but great tune, Almost Human. And then Ace coming out with Shock Me. I mean, that's still probably my favorite Ace song of all time. It's just amazing what he did on that song.
Of course, Shock Me was written about a real-life thing that happened to Ace the previous tour when he was electrocuted on stage and collapsed, and that's what that song is actually about. Turner, thank you for your thoughts. Somebody previous said that their negative against Love Gun was the fact that there's a cover on it, and the song Tomorrow and Tonight was also a negative. And the thing that's interesting, Tomorrow and Tonight was a blatant attempt at Kiss to recapture an anthem. Rock and Roll All Night had become such an anthem, they basically wanted a sequel to that. Shout It Out Loud, an anthem, a couple records previous on Destroyer. Where's their sequel? Well, that was Tomorrow and Tonight. I think what happened with Tomorrow and Tonight is people just kind of sniffed it out as a little bit being redundant, being the same formula of Shout It Out Loud and Rock and Roll All Night. So when people detract from that song, that's probably the reason why. Here's Ed in Colorado. Go ahead, Ed.
Hey, Eddie, thanks for taking my call, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I was 9 years old and walked by my brother's room, and I heard this song, and I just like, what the hell is that? And I went in there and was talking to him and checked it out, and it was Destroyer. And the song was Do You Love Me? And it just, ever since then, it's just been my favorite Kiss album. The whole thing, the way it just comes together. It's just been a kick-ass album. And
all
don't
right,
get
Ed.
me wrong. If you put it in order, it would be Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, Love Gun are my top three in that order. But they're just three of the greatest albums. So it's tough, but Destroyer all the way. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. Funny thing is, not only did all three of these records come out within like 18 months, but you put them all together and it's like 90 minutes of music because they're all about 30 minutes long. I mean, that's how it was in the 70s. You didn't make long records because this was, of course, the vinyl era, vinyl being pretty much the only format, along with 8-track. And in vinyl, if you get over 34, 35 minutes, 20 minutes on each side max, the quality degrades because the grooves are closer together. So most artists, unless they were making a double record, kept it between 35 minutes or so total running time on an album. And it wasn't uncommon. There were bands that did this, like a studio record every 6 months. It blows your mind when you think about it. But that's, these guys are in their early 20s at this point. You could do it. But it would be like go on the road for 6 months while you're out there, write a record, run in the studio for a couple weeks, knock it out, get right back out on the road. You knew that Kiss did that on their first three records because they just kept taking swings at it to try to break, to try to get a hit, to make it. But the fact that they kept that up after they broke on these 3 records is pretty incredible. Another fellow huge Kiss fan and our program director and fearless leader, Roger Coletti, joining us now with his thoughts. Raj, I'm curious where you land on this.
First, I want to know, did I beat Sebastian and John 5 to it? Am I first in?
I don't think John 5's allowed to call in yet because he's on a he's being, he's now in a big band and he's got to kind of march to the rules, but he told me he will talk to him the other day. We will get his first interview as being a member of Motley Crue. So I'm sure we'll hear from him then about it.
Cool. All right.
And it's too early for Sebastian. He listens on the app.
This is true. This one is kind of tough, but 3 amazing records. I take Destroyer off the table right away, only because for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, but Destroyer is a masterpiece in every sense of the word. But as a true Kiss fan from day one, Destroyer is a little too perfect for me. Everything's a little too calculated on the record. I mean, it's just so well thought out. Every solo, every note is pitch perfect.
Well, I said this, Raj, real quick. I don't know if you heard this when I came on, but I said this, and here's the thing people don't realize about Destroyer. Though, as being the follow-up to Alive, the Kiss fans that loved Kiss and when they broke off of Alive initially hated Destroyer. I've read so many books about when Destroyer first came out. The band regretted making it. Like, they thought it was going to be the disaster of disasters for that reason.
Which was odd because when it came out, I really loved it because I was like, wow, this is huge. And it was different. But, like I said, it is a piece of art. And it is just so perfect, which is why you get more songs off that album live than any of the 3. It's a great record. Rock and Roll Over, on the other hand, is probably, I think, the one album that is the most balanced that they've ever done. It's probably them playing at their absolute best, probably them getting along at their absolute best, too. And it shows. I mean, there's not a song you skip on this record. I think it's some of Ace's and Peter's best playing, all of them, as a matter of fact. You even get, Paul taking solos in I Want You and things they've never done before. It's just a great record. I mean, all 3 records have great artwork. You can't, it's kind of like an even match there. And then there's Love Gun, which has always been my favorite Kiss record until recently. I think I Stole Your Love and Love Gun are 2 of my all-time favorite songs. You get Ace Would Shock Me. But when I listen to Love Gun start to finish, and then I listen to Rock and Roll Over start to finish, Rock and Roll Over to me just wins because it just feels a bit more connected, complete. And it is, like I said, I just think it's them at their absolute best playing-wise. And I think it's the album that sounds closest to being a studio record but captures what the band sounds like live, which is what they didn't get in Destroyer.
Totally. And you know what's really interesting from what you just said that just hit me too? Think about this. So Destroyer, it was well known that Ezrin worked the shit out of them to be better musicians, better singers, better writers. And they did that. When you listen to what they did on Destroyer, it's unbelievable, to the point that some people don't even know if they questioned if it was really them because it was such a step up in terms of playing. But it was just Ezrin pulling that out of them. So now they had that crash course. They had that getting whipped into shape by Ezrin, and then they make Rock and Roll Over. And they use what Ezrin taught them as far as in the studio and players and performers, but then they put it under the umbrella of what classic Kiss sounded like live.
Right, and I think they had a comfort because they had worked with Kramer on demos before, so and I think Alive. But I think he understood the balance between what fans wanted from them as a live act and what needed to get put on the record. And I think that's exactly what he delivered.
So your pick is Rock and Roll Over.
It is. And, this is how crazy me and you are. We probably talked about this 3 or 4 months ago, and my answer was Love Gun. But to this day, I could go back to a Kiss catalog and and change my mind, Yeah,
well, me too. But I go Rock and Roll Over because now we're like in the last 10 years or so, if I'm reaching for a Kiss studio record to listen to top to bottom, it's probably the record I'm reaching for.
I mean, the only thing missing really on Rock and Roll Over is an Ace sung song, and that doesn't come to Love Gun. That's the only thing missing. You've got, I think, Peter's best song, best vocal with Hard Luck Woman. You know, every Gene and Paul song is great. Ace's solos are phenomenal. So that, to me, it's the one thing missing that would have made it just over the top, but it's still, I think, hands down, their best album start to finish.
Two Peter lead vocals on Rock and Roll Over, Baby Driver too.
Right, with Baby Driver, which is another great song.
Yeah. So I was okay. I'm okay with Ace not having a lead vocal because the mystique of Ace at this point, like one of the real big mystique things about Ace up to this point was nobody even heard what he sounded like. You know, nobody knew if he could sing. Nobody heard it. So I kind of like the idea that the Spaceman was just kind of seen and you heard him playing, but you never heard him sing or be out there like that. So I think that a little bit of that played into his mystique at the time.
And then you even had a little more of like, you got more a little acoustic-y kind of stuff with Hard Luck Woman, and even in the promo video with Ace and Paul on the 12 and 6-string together. There was just a lot of cool stuff going on with this record.
And the Southern rock feel to Mr. Speed, to this day, one of my favorites. My gosh, so great. Listen, man, I got a million calls here, but I'm glad you weighed in because I wanted your take on this.
Appreciate you giving me the time, my brother.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
See you. There he goes, Roger, our program director and massive Kiss fan. Him and his brother worked on the Kissology stuff that came out, those great DVD sets that came out a while ago. Okay, let's continue with Leslie, who is in Pontiac, Michigan, I guess, a scene of great Kiss history. Leslie, what's your pick here?
Destroyer.
Leslie, you weren't Leslie, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask, but you weren't there when they landed at Pontiac High and all that, were you?
No, I was a kid then.
Okay.
But I first heard Destroyer in 1987. I just moved in with my girlfriend. We had a conversation about Van Halen and junk when they came out in the 70s when we was kids. Well, she was already a fan. She had the albums. I said, well, let me hear it. And she said, I gotta tell you, there's only one lyric to a song. I said, what's the song? Detroit Rock City. Oh, really? I stated. I heard the song, and every time I've seen Kiss twice, that every time they come here, they always open up with Detroit Rock City. There's your history, America. Enjoy. Catch y'all later.
Thank you, Leslie. So Leslie weighing in on Destroyer, who, of course, is from Michigan and from just, I guess, outside of Detroit Rock City. But Pontiac in particular, if you are a huge Kiss fan, there's a lot of history of an event that they did, a promo event back then around, I forget what record it was for. Maybe it might have been even earlier, that like Alive or just Dress to Kill period. A lot of Canada weighing in on this, which is great. Here's Greg, who's in Toronto. Go ahead, Greg.
Hey, Eddie. Yeah, Love Gun's got Shock Me. The Destroyer tour was killer, and I love King of the Nighttime World. But for pure crunch and heaviness, it's got nothing to do with the free stickers that came in the album, but Rock and Roll Over is easily my pick.
Yeah, Greg, that's another great point, that the stuff you got in these records was, if you're, and thank you, Greg, for weighing in. If you know, as a Kiss fan, when these records came out, I used to say this all the time. One of the things we did was you'd slit the side of the jacket of the record, and I would just shake it to see what would fall out. Of course, the record and the sleeve would be in there, but in Kiss records, there'd be all kinds of other stuff in there. Tattoos, posters, stickers. Of course, even back then, the order form for merch. So let me try. Destroyer, I don't think had anything in it beyond the Kiss Army stuff, which I think was in Destroyer, which may have been the first time they introduced that. And then Rock and Roll Over had that fantastic sticker in it. And Love Gun had the Love Gun. It had a little cardboard gun that you taped together, and if you whipped it in the air, it would capture like the paper in front of the gun, and it would say bang. It was like a cardboard cutout gun. And of course, all of them had the order blank to sign up for the fan club and to buy shirts and all of that. Here's Gregory in Virginia. What do you got, Greg?
Hey, Eddie, good to talk to you. Happy New Year. I'd pick Destroyer. I mean, I remember going back to high school in 1978, cruising in my Dodge Monaco, listening to it on the 8-track, and every bump I hit, I had to ground it to the ashtray, and I had a bunch of 10-amp fuses. So it was kind of wild, you know. And I remember when rock and roll came over. I used to rock and roll over. I used to go to a record store, and they had the posters and Love Gun too. That, you know, you walk in the door, you see a big poster, you know, on the wall. But I think Destroyer for me, Detroit Rock City classic. You can't go wrong with that song. It's great. And how about doing a Cheap Trick Throwdown, the first 3 albums?
Could do that. Could absolutely do that. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you chiming in. We'll put you down for, what did he say, Joel? Destroyer? Was his pick?
Yeah, Destroyer.
We're keeping a tab on this. We'll give you our stats at the end just before 5 Eastern. When you talk about the album covers, as I mentioned before, the same guy did Love Gun and Destroyer, Ken Kelly, who sadly passed away recently. Different guy did Rock and Roll Over. My favorite, tough to say because Destroyer is so iconic, but I really love the Rock and Roll Over cover. To me, Love Gun is just a redo of Destroyer. It's just very similar. The band's wearing their costumes at that time. You got the women at their feet wearing the makeup. You know, it's also extremely cool, but it's I'm looking at them next to each other. There's obviously a similarity. It's clearly the same artist, but Rock and Roll Over, just that circular design, just so friggin' cool. Here's Rich, who's in Anaheim, joining us right now. What's your pick, Rich?
Oh, this was very, very easy for me. I think song for song, Rock and Roll Over is the best of the 3. I remember when you hear Take Me, Mr. Speed, Making Love, Baby Driver, all those songs, there's just not one filler on that album. So that is my take on this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate that. The other thing about Rock and Roll Over, too, is when you look at the songwriting, talk about Kiss getting back to being Kiss, not only was it like that sonically, but also just from the writing perspective. What a lot of people don't know about Destroyer is, first of all, Bob Ezrin had a huge hand in co-writing many of the songs. And there's a couple songs on there, like King of the Nighttime World, that were actually technically covers that were done, kind of rewrites of songs that were recorded by others. When you look at the writing credits on Rock and Roll Over, it's pretty much all Gene and Paul. Not pretty much. I'm looking at it right now. It is, with the exception of 2 songs, take that back, 3 songs that had a co-write from a guy by the name of Sean Delaney, who worked with Kiss at the time in a management. Sean Delaney, who also passed away, a very, very, very important and not talked about enough figure in Kiss history, because he was a partner of Bill Aucoin's, and he really worked a ton with Kiss, did some songwriting with them, but also worked with them on their choreography and their show and everything at the time. Very much the right hand of Bill Aucoin back then. Let's get Sean in Georgia in here to weigh in. Go ahead, Sean.
Hey, Eddie, how's it going?
Great. What do you got, Sean?
Good. Definitely Rock and Roll Over. And the reason is that, you know, out of the gate, the first 4 songs, I Want You, Take Me, Calling Dr. Love, Ladies Room. I mean, those songs are fire. And kind of like you, I can't remember which one actually I got first, whether it was Rock and Roll Over or Destroyer. But, you know, Destroyer is great. Obviously, it's epic. Some of the songs get kind of, I don't know, a little funky in there with the chorus and the orchestra. The thing about Love Gun is it's a fantastic album. And if you put Shock Me on Rock and Roll Over, I mean, it wouldn't even be a discussion. Because to have, you know, Ace finally make his vocal appearance with a great song, that would have made it the quintessential album. So you put me down for Rock and Roll Over.
Yeah, I think thank you, Sean. I think Ace was electrocuted on the Rock and Roll Over tour, which led him to write Shock Me, and it went on the Love Gun record, because I think Rock and Roll Over was the first tour where they had the staircases on either side of the drums. Trying to remember if the staircases were there on Destroyer or not. The Destroyer was like the Destroyed City thing. But I'm pretty sure it was the Rock and Roll Over tour that Ace was electrocuted walking down the stairs, and the neck of his guitar created a circuit with the metal railing. He collapsed, and that's what Shock Me was written about. So then that shows up on the next record on Love Gun. Let's get one more in here before a break, but don't worry, we got like a whole nother hour to pull this apart. And we could do this for easily a whole week. It's just too much fun. Here's Landon in New Jersey. Hi, Landon.
Hi, Eddie. How are you?
I'm good. What's your pick?
Destroyer. I mean, it's a great album cover, great songs. Shout Out Loud was the first Kiss song I ever heard at, too. And I've just been a fan ever since. I mean, the makeup, the costumes, and everything. I mean, God of Thunder, Do You Love Me, Detroit Rock City, Shout Out Loud, all Kiss songs that they've been playing ever since.
Well, yeah, we talked about that. When you look at these records, and thank you, Landon, when you look at these records, as far as what does the band still play live to this day, real quickly, looking at Love Gun, you've got the title track. Believe it or not, unbelievably, they do play Shock Me with Tommy Thayer singing it as Ace, which is just, I'm not going to start. And that's it. I mean, that's it from Love Gun. I mean, you never hear anything else in the regular show from Love Gun. On Rock and Roll Over, what would you possibly get? Calling Dr. Love. And that's probably about it, believe it or not. There's nothing on there that you're getting. I mean, you get Calling Dr. Love. That's it. That's crazy. And then when you look at Destroyer, you're always getting Detroit Rock City, sometimes King of the Nighttime World, always getting God of Thunder, always getting Shouted Out Loud. Again, inexplicably, Eric Singer singing Beth, and usually getting Do You Love Me. I mean, the only thing on Detroit Rock City, on Destroyer, that you would never hear live would be Great Expectations and Sweet Pain. And maybe Flaming Youth. I don't know if they ever do Flaming Youth. I mean, again, I haven't gone in 20 years, but probably not really Flaming Youth. I doubt they do that. So out of the 9 tracks, about 6 to this day from Destroyer, you got a pretty good chance of hearing live. By a mile, the song the record with the most representative songs to this day. But we're talking about the hardcore Kiss fans, the hardcore rock fans in general, which is my audience that knows this stuff inside out. And I've always felt that most of them feel Rock and Roll Over is the record. It's a little similar when you talk about Aerosmith, and I think we did Toys versus Rocks. Toys, by a mile, the classic Aerosmith record, but to the hardcore Aerosmith fan, myself included, Rocks is the greatest record. You could actually make that as a really interesting comparison, that Toys in the Attic is to Destroyer what Rock and Roll Over is to Rocks, if you look at Aerosmith and Kiss. Now, Aerosmith got a ton more airplay and sold more records, but in terms of the parallels and the way they're perceived by fans, that's interesting. And that's another interesting thing. Aerosmith, no doubt, had way more hits, sold way more records, but at this time in the mid-'70s, Kiss was, because of the show, the makeup, the mystique, a way bigger band. I don't know if I could say way bigger, but just a whole different level of big, a different kind of big. That's a whole nother discussion when you look at 2 iconic 70s bands at this time. So I don't want to open that wormhole right now, maybe another time. All right, let's keep it in the Destroyer Rock and Roll Over Love Gun debate. Here's a little Flaming Youth from Destroyer taking us into break.